Hello everyone, DM Gashbad here. We are back in the old world with a Warhammer Fantasy Battles 8th edition battle report. I've been having some troubles scheduling games recently, but it has been my own fault, so it was really nice when a member of the gaming group, kind of out of the blue, asked if I wanted to play Warhammer Fantasy. And he pitched a pretty interesting setup. 1,000 points aside, but each side is made up of two separate 500-point armies. Kind of interesting. I've got a fair number of small Warhammer Fantasy Battles armies knocking around. In the end, I went with my Empire and the Ogre Kingdoms. The first thing to decide when I was making my army list was the general of my Empire force. Now, I wanted to have some magic in the list, and I didn't want to use an Ogre magic user. On the other hand, the Empire leadership isn't great at 500 points, so if I took a wizard as my general, I'd be stuck with leadership 7. But that's kind of the nice thing about Empire. If you want a jack of all trades, chances are they've got a unit or a character to take that position. In this case, it's a Warrior Priest, a perfect combo of a fighty character and a wizard. He's got some nice, reliable, easy to cast buff spells that don't miscast, and on top of that I gave him the Ruby Ring of Ruin for a little long-range blasting. At small points values, the Ruby Ring of Ruin is just really good. It's hard to pass up. I gave him heavy armor and a shield. He's not fantastic in hand-to-hand, but he is leadership 8, which was what I was looking for. So that's my general, the Warrior Priest Gerum Macroth. To go with him, I picked out my Ready Reavers, that's 22 swordsmen with full command. I gave them 2 detachments, a group of 6 archers, and a group of 10 free company. I like the detachment rules. They give some pretty interesting combat options, and the free company aren't bad in small points games. For their points, they can kick out a fair number of attacks, and archers are pretty good too. Their bows don't accomplish a whole lot, although they accomplish more in small games than they do in big games, but as skirmishers, they're pretty mobile and make pretty good chaff. Finally, I was torn between a group of knights and a great cannon. On the one hand, knights have not been performing well for me. Not that the Great Cannon's been amazing, but the riding roughshods have embarrassed themselves in several games. So I was hesitant to bring those in, but the idea of bringing a cannon to a 500-point game just didn't appeal to me. I didn't think my opponent would appreciate it, and I didn't think it would make for a very interesting game, so knights it was, 5 knights with a standard. The Ogre side was easier to choose. I pretty much just took what I had and what would fit into the points available. They're led by a Bruiser Rubric Haggis. He was given a Sword of Might, which brings him all the way up to the maximum of 125 points that I can spend on heroes, but it gives him a real nice beefy Strength 6. He's joined by the Skull Splatterers, a group of 5 ogres with full command, 2 Sabertusks, Selena and Kyle, and the Calloused Saddle Swords. Those are 2 Mournfang cavalry with heavy armor, iron fists, and a Crusher. With all that out of the way, let's take a look at my opponent's side of the table. I'm gonna have some thoughts on his army selection and the table setup, but I'm gonna save that for the very end. For now, he has got an interesting combination of High Elves and Warriors of Chaos. The Warriors of Chaos are led by a level 1 Chaos Sorcerer on Metal Magic. He has the spell Searing Doom and has an enchanted shield, which gives him a pretty good 2+ armor save. Rounding out the force, we have 5 Chaos Knights with full command, a Chaos Chariot, and 5 Chaos Hounds. On the other side, the High Elves are also led by a level 1 mage, this time on Fire Magic, who again took the default spell with Fireball. There are also 10 Seaguard with no command, 10 Sword Masters with full command and the Gleaming Pennant, that's the magic standard that allows you to re-roll your first failed leadership test, an Eagle Claw Repeating Bolt Thrower, and a Great Eagle. So it's a pair of extremely compact armies. Altogether, they have less models than my Empire force alone. They have a lot of magic, a lot of shooting, some hard-hitting fast elements, and a fair bit of chaff. Before we begin, of course, it's important to mention the allies rules for Warhammer Fantasy. On my side, Empire is an order faction, and the Ogre Kingdoms are neutral, which makes us suspicious allies. That means our armies are going to operate pretty much normally for a larger army, except that the Ogres can't benefit from my Empire's general's leadership and vice versa. On the other hand, the High Elves and Warriors of Chaos are desperate allies, meaning not only do they not benefit from their allied army's general's leadership, they also don't count as friendly troops to each other, so they don't take panic tests when an allied unit is destroyed near them or flees through them. They count as enemy troops when an allied unit flees through them. And in the magic phase, they have to split power and dispel dice between the 2 armies. Now let's talk about the board. We're playing on a 4x4 board, and since it's smaller than usual, we went and just halved the number of terrain pieces that we rolled for. So normally on a full-size game of Warhammer, you rolled d6 plus 4, we rolled d3 plus 2, and of course we rolled the maximum of 5 pieces. In the very center of the table, we have a haunted mansion. Almost certainly this is going to play a big part in the game. Any unit within 6 inches of the haunted mansion at the end of the shooting phase, every shooting phase, takes d6 strength 1 hits with no armor save. And since my opponent put this in the very center of the table and we're playing on a small board, there's going to be very little we can do to avoid this. In the top left corner, we have a standard mysterious forest. In the top right, we have a regular building. Center right, we have a Nehekaran Sphinx. At the start of your turn, one of your characters within 6 inches of the Sphinx, in this case it's a Lamazu atop an arcane fulcrum, they can challenge the Sphinx to a riddle contest, and so they take an initiative test. If they pass, they gain a random ability from a chart in the book, and if they fail, they take a wound. And finally, in the bottom right, we have an Idol of Gork. Units within 6 inches of that can re-roll any failed charge distance rolls. As for deployment, it was pretty obvious what my opponent was going to do. He had a lot of shooting, he had a lot of magic, and he piled a lot of the terrain in the center of the board. So he created 2 funnels to allow my troops to advance. So he's going to blast my troops as I go forward, and then attack with his fast, hard-hitting stuff when I get into those choke points. So the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower is in the dead center, way in the back. The Eagle is in the center, up a little bit in order to work as chaff. The Chaos Hounds are to the right, screening the Swordmasters. The Seaguard and the Elven Mage are all the way over on the right. I thought that was an interesting placement, but it turns out my opponent had something specific in mind with them. The Chaos Knights and the Chariot are in the center left, and the Chaos Sorcerer couldn't really effectively join any of the units in the Chaos Army, so he's off by his lonesome all the way on the left-hand side. For my part, I decided to put my Empire forces on the left because it was a little bit of a larger area, allowing that larger force to maneuver. I wasn't too worried about the ghosts picking off too many of the swordsmen, so they took the center left, and they're gonna hug the side of the Haunted Mansion as they advance. The 2 detachments have to deploy within 3 inches of them, so the archers are in the front on the left, and the Free Company are behind them, and the knights are way over on the left because they do not want to get punched by ghosts. On the other side, the ogres have a fair number of wounds, so I wasn't as worried about the ghosts. So the Mournfang are in the center. They're either going to move in front of my ogres or behind them, depending on how things go. The ogres are a little bit to the right. The Saber-Tusks I had some problems with. Obviously, I'd like for them to range ahead and work as chaff or just things that can hunt down vulnerable small units. But my opponent has so much shooting and magic that I really don't have a lot of free range with these guys. If I leave them within 6 inches of any of my units, there's a very good possibility that they're going to get picked off by the Sea Guard or the Bolt Thrower or the Fire Mage, and that would cause a panic test on my other units, which I definitely don't want. At Leadership 8, it's just a risky proposition taking panic tests. So they had to get pushed either far back in the center or way off to the right. I had finished deploying first, so I got a +1 to the dice roll to see who takes the first turn, and I won, so I'm going to go ahead and take that. There's no point in me just hanging out. I'm not going to be able to tempt my opponent to advance towards me, so I might as well go towards him. Show these elves, chaos warriors, and ghosts that I'm not afraid. On the right, my Saber-Tusk goes and hides behind the Sphinx. I didn't see any way that my opponent would be able to get to that next round. I go ahead and advance the Ogres and the Bruiser into that gap on the right first. I figure there's a very good possibility that whatever I send through there first is going to get chaffed up and have to eat some charges. And I think the Ogres are in a better position to take those charges than the Mournfang. The Mournfang fall in behind the Ogres, and over on the left, my Empire force advance pretty much as you would expect it to. The Swordsmen go straight forward along with the Free Company. The other Saber-Tusk does fall back behind them to lend support if the time comes. The Knights hold back. They have speed to catch up if they need to, and I'm worried about a couple of things. Number one is the Metal Magic and Searing Doom on that Chaos Sorcerer on the left, and of course the Ghosts in the center of the table. I do not want to advance the Knights forward, allowing the Chaos Sorcerer to retreat and continue to cast Searing Doom on them, taking off d6 Knights every round. I get a fair number of power dice in the magic phase, and I spend 6 of them on a fireball. I want to take out that Chaos Sorcerer, because I just don't like wizards very much. I get the spell through, and I roll extremely well. I cause 4 wounds on the Chaos Sorcerer. Unfortunately, when my opponent was telling me his army list, I kind of glazed over the fact that he has an enchanted shield, which gives him this really good armor save. Still, 4 wounds, needing a 3+ to save, that's not bad odds, but my opponent goes and saves every single one of them, and so he is just fine. As the archers are skirmishers, they can fire even if they march, so I go ahead and take shots at the Chaos Sorcerer because they really don't have any other targets. Again, no damage is caused there. At the end of the shooting phase, the ghosts from the Haunted Mansion managed to cause no damage to my units that have moved up within range of that, which is actually quite a few of them, and we move on to Chaos and High Elf turn 1. First off in the movement phase, a surprise move on the right. It turns out those Sea Guard were within 5 inches of that building all the way in that corner, and so they were able to just walk right in and occupy it. That's going to cause me some problems. Also on the right, clearly my opponent is going to focus on the ogres first, and since he's dealing with a big divided battlefield, this allows him to do that. He double chaffs the ogres. He puts the Chaos Hounds in front and the eagle behind them, and then just sets up a bunch of his guys to deal with whatever makes it through there. He's got his Sword Masters, his Chaos Chariot, and his Chaos Knights all kind of pointed in that direction. On the far left, his Chaos Sorcerer just touches forward a little bit so that he has my Empire Knights in range. In the magic phase, my opponent gets a very average number of power dice. He uses his first set, remember he has to split these evenly, to cast Fireball on my Saber-Tusk that I thought was hidden behind the Sphinx. Well, not when the mage has a commanding view in that building. So, he targets the Saber-Tusk, kills it off, but I do pass the panic test on my nearby Ogre unit. On the left, he does try to cast Searing Doom, but I managed to dispel it with my Dispel dice. In the shooting phase, the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower makes a very difficult shot on my Mournfang, but fails to do any damage. The Sea Guard do a lot better. They target the ogres in front and put 2 wounds on an ogre, and then we go on to the Ghost phase. What I'd really like to have these ghosts do is cause 2 wounds on the Chaos Hounds screening my ogres. That would force a panic test on them, which they are unlikely to pass, and then it would allow my ogres to charge that building with the mage and the Sea Guard, and that would be amazing. Unfortunately, nothing even close to that happens. With all the units surrounding the Haunted Mansion, the only unit to take any damage is the Eagle, which takes 1 wound. Back over to the ogres and the Empire. Again, I'm not going to get anywhere just standing here getting shot, so I'm going to charge the chaff. I charge the Chaos Hounds in front of me, and I realize that even if I destroy them, none of the High Elf units around them are going to take any panic tests. The Eagle is there to catch any overruns. What I did try to do is declare a charge with both units. So the Mournfang and the Ogres with the Bruiser both declared a charge on the Hounds. My hope was that I could force the Ogres far enough over that they could move past the Eagle and get into the Sword Masters. Turns out I couldn't, but I did manage to get both units in contact, which I think is a slightly better position than having them stacked up behind each other. Over on the left, the Empire advances, emboldened by the fact that my opponent's 2 armies seem concentrated on the Ogres, and the fact that the Searing Doom and the Ghost didn't cause any damage last round. In the magic phase, again, I'm able to cast the Ruby Ring of Ruin, the Fireball spell, this time on the Sword Masters. I kill off one of them, which I guess is better than nothing. With the knight standing right in front of the Empire Swordsman, I think that there is a chance that they get into combat, so I try to cast a couple of the Warrior Priest's Prayers of Sigmar. In the end, the only one that I'm able to get off is the Shield of Sigmar for a 5-up ward save in hand-to-hand combat. Now, the Swordsmen already have a 6+ ward save, but it's not bad. In the shooting phase, the archers again fail to put any damage on the Chaos Sorcerer, and then we go back to the ghosts. This time it seems like it's the ogres that angered the spirits from the ancient burial ground that the house was built on. The regular Mournfang takes a wound, and 2 wounds are placed on the ogre unit, killing off an ogre, which definitely doesn't help. We don't exactly get an auspicious start to the hand-to-hand combat phase. We start off with the Mournfang, who roll up their impact hits and end up with 4, and then I proceed to roll 4 1s to wound against the Chaos Hounds. Nice one, you idiots. The ogres only do slightly better, causing 1 wound with their impact hits. And then the hounds are next in the initiative order. Thankfully they fail their fear test, so they only hit on 5s. That means they caused no damage. It would have been really embarrassing if they had stuck a wound on a Mournfang or something, and then they're wiped out in return. So I could overrun into the eagle, but that would allow the Swordmasters to charge my ogres in the flank, which I don't want to have happen. And with my two units being so close together, I can't really reform them, so I'm just going to stay right there. If my opponent wants to ambush me, he's got to charge me in the front arc and make this a fair fight. So Chaos High Elf round 2, the first thing that my opponent does is his High Elf Mage challenges the Sphinx to a riddle contest. The Mage has a sky-high initiative, so it's almost assured that he's going to pass that test, and he does, and he rolls on the random chart and gets Heroic Killing Blow. Kind of interesting, kind of cool. Of course, what he really wants is to get Lore Master Death, which would radically alter the state of the game. But thankfully he didn't roll that, and so we move on with declaring charges. After thinking about it for a while, my opponent decides to charge the Eagle and the Chaos Chariot into the Mournfang, and the Chaos Knights with a long charge into the Ogres along with the Swordmasters, who have a short charge. The Eagle and the Chariot go in automatically, but it's a little dicey with the Chaos Knights and they end up failing. My opponent was a little worried about this because he had mathed it out and figured that the Swordmasters were probably going to lose the fight with the Ogres, but they only fail the charge on a double ones, and guess what he rolls? He snake eyes the charge distance, and so no one ends up charging the Ogres. That was a little unexpected. On the other side of the table, the Chaos Sorcerer decides to charge my skirmishing archers. That's also kind of an interesting choice. I guess he didn't like the odds of being able to avoid my knights for too much longer. It wasn't exactly a short charge, he needed to roll pretty well, and the Chaos Sorcerer is really only okay in combat, so there was the chance that he gets stuck and gets surrounded by my guys and killed off. But he figured it was worth the risk, because if he charged in, won the combat, my guys broke, then he would escape behind my lines. For my part, I thought there was a good chance that the Chaos Sorcerer was going to get stuck there, and so I responded with a stand and shoot reaction. It didn't cause any damage, and at the end of the day, the Chaos Sorcerer did make his charge roll and end up in combat on the left. In the magic phase, he gets a reasonable number of power dice, but of course half of those have to go to the Chaos Sorcerer, who's in combat and can't cast his Searing Doom spell, so he goes for the big fireball on my swordsman, looking for those 3d6 strength 4 hits. Unfortunately for him, he does not get the casting value, so we move on to the shooting phase. The Sea Guard can't cause any damage, but the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower can pick on the Ogres, who are of course not engaged in hand-to-hand combat due to those weird charge distance rolls. They put down another 2 wounds and kills off yet another Ogre. Still mad at the Ogres, the Ghost put another wound on the Skull Splatterers, but they also turn some of their ire on the Chaos Forces and pick off a Chaos Knight, which is kind of a big deal. In the hand-to-hand combat phase, we start off with the epic battle of the Chaos Sorcerer against my skirmishing archers. The Sorcerer swings first and manages to chop the head off one of my peasants. In response, they do great, and they cause 2 wounds to the Chaos Sorcerer. Now, of course, he has his enchanted shield, and so he has his 2-up armor save, but then he rolls another set of double ones, and the archers just stab the Sorcerer in the eyes with their little arrows, and he falls over and dies. Well, hey, how do you like that? Well, that worked out pretty well, so now we're going to go over to the Mournfang against the Eagle and the Chaos Chariot. The Chariot manages to put a wound on both the Mournfang Crusher and the regular Mournfang. The regular Mournfang is now down to just 1 wound. That's about what you would expect, I think. However, the Chaos Chariot then goes and fails its fear test, which is a big deal. That means that no further damage is caused to the Mournfang. As for the Ogres, the Mournfang Crusher puts his attacks into the Eagle. Everyone else directs their attacks into the Chariot. I figure the Eagle is really hurt. The Crusher should be able to finish it off. He does cause a wound, but I had forgotten that these stupid things have 3 wounds instead of 2. Man, I hate Great Eagles. Anyway, the Mournfang completely bomb their rolls and don't cause any damage to the Chaos Chariot, needing 3s to hit, 4s to wound. It's a whole thing. The regular Ogre atop does put 1 wound on the Chariot, but at the end of the day, the Mournfang have lost the combat by 1 because of the charge. That's putting me at a 7 or less break test, which I fail. Both the Eagle and Chariot pursue, but I manage to outpace them. Unfortunately, this is going to cause a panic test on my nearby Ogres. That's okay, they've got an 8 leadership. No, they also fail, and because of the positioning of everything and all that terrain stacked over on the right, they zip straight through the Sphinx and the building and go right off the board. This game, sometimes you think you catch a break, and it turns out just to be an illusion. If those Swordmasters had actually charged in, I wouldn't have had to have made that panic test. Even if I ended up losing that combat and getting run down by the Swordmasters, at least I would have killed off some of them in the combat phase. So I just lost essentially the entirety of my Ogre force, but that's the way these small games go sometimes. Moving on to Ogre and Empire turn 3. Starting off on the Empire side, which is really the only side left for this turn, the swordsmen are looking right at the flank of these Chaos Knights parked immediately in front of them, and so declare a charge. The Knights recognize that there are some tactical problems to this position that they put themselves in, and so elect to flee, and they roll the perfect distance. If they had rolled any further, they would have passed through the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower, taken dangerous terrain tests, and gone off the table. If they had rolled any less, then the swordsmen would have almost certainly caught them. But they roll a very juicy 10 inches and end up right in front of the Bolt Thrower like that, safe from my Empire troops. It is also just far enough that I can't declare any subsequent charges with my Free Company or my archers, which also would have driven them off the table. Over to the rally phase, and we've got these Mournfang who get another shot at making a 7 or less leadership test, and guess what? They don't do it, and they keep running straight off the table, passing through that Idol of Gork as they go. You jerks. Well, it's looking bad, but what can my guys do but press forward? The Free Company and the Knights fall in to the left flank of the Swordsmen, advancing on the Knights and the Repeater Bolt Thrower. My Sabertusk and the Archers double back. We're going to see if we can't pick off the Chariot or the Eagle in their victorious surge forward. In the magic phase, I don't bother with any of the Warrior Priest's prayers because no one's going to be able to charge my swordsmen in the next round, and so they won't come into effect. Instead, I cast Fireball again, and I manage to pick off one crewman of the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower. Doesn't cause a panic test, doesn't slow down the rate of fire. I guess it's Dead Elf, that should make me happy. In the shooting phase, the archers take aim at the eagle who has one wound remaining, but they fail to finish that off. But the ghosts are mad. They do not like all the noise that we're causing, and so they kill off one swordsman, put a wound on the chariot, and also kill the eagle. Well, good. Back to the Warriors of Chaos and the High Elves. The Knights rally on a 9 successfully. Darn. The mage again correctly answers the Sphinx's riddle and now gets devastating charge. My opponent really wants to try to swift reform the Swordmasters to face the Empire troops, but he's worried that he might fail the leadership test and use up his gleaming pennant with the reroll. In the end, he decides to go for it anyway. Sure enough, fails the first leadership test, and then he fails the second one on top of that. Just weird sets of dice in this game. It doesn't matter that much. The Swordmasters just reform, they don't get their bonus move. The chariot trucks along the edge of the haunted mansion. The Sea Guard leave their building along with the mage. The mage again is thinking go big or go home. Again tries the big fireball. Again fails to cast. Even though the Chaos Sorcerer is dead, still have to divide up those power dice, so he's not getting a lot of dice to deal with. The Bolt Thrower is having a little trouble aiming because of all the Chaos Warriors and horses in front of them, and so they cause no damage. The Sea Guard managed to pick off one of my swordsmen, and the ghosts are a little tired and don't cause any more harm to the nearby forces. So back over to the Empire, Empire and Sabertusk. The swordsmen go declare charge against the Chaos Knights now that they've reformed, and they make it. The Free Company also declare charge on the Knights. They're a little far away, they don't make it, but really what I wanted to do with them was clear the way for my Empire Knights so that they could charge the Chaos Chariot. I was a little hesitant about this charge, a little on the longer side. I think I needed a 9 on the dice to make it in. The problem, of course, would be that if I failed, then I might be taking ghost attacks, and the chariot could just countercharge me. Turns out I didn't need to worry about it. I didn't need to spend all that time thinking. I roll a 111 for my charge distance. I think maybe my house might be built on some sort of burial ground. A lot of cursed dice this game. In the end, though, it's not really so bad. It means that I'm not within range of that stupid haunted mansion, for instance. Now that we don't have to take shots at that eagle, the archers go and hustle back on the other side of the building, and the Sabertusk continues to wander the other direction. So, magic phase. I don't have to worry about Fireball this round, but I really would like to get off some of those prayers. The only one I managed to get through, though, is Shield of Faith, 5-up ward save in hand-to-hand combat. Not terrible, considering what I'm fighting. Over to the shooting phase, my archers failed to pick off any of the sword masters, but the ghosts killed the chariot. I hope it was the spirit of one of my dead ogres. Over to the hand-to-hand combat phase, the Chaos Knight champion has to issue a challenge, and my Warrior Priest accepts. Why would I do this? Again, I said my Warrior Priest is not particularly good in hand-to-hand combat. Well, I think I'm actually going to take less attacks in a challenge than I would if I were, say, getting attacked by 2 regular Chaos Knights. So in he goes, and he does pretty well. He doesn't take any damage from the knight, doesn't cause any either, but that's okay. In fact, none of my swordsmen managed to cause any damage, not terribly surprising. But what's nice is that the damage back is also pretty low. I lose my swordsman champion and 1 regular swordsman, and when we count everything up, that means I'm up by 2, which means those knights are facing a 6 or less break test, which they pass. Rad. Well, that was kind of my best shot at getting back into this game, so now it's over to the High Elves and the Warriors of Chaos. The Swordmasters go and complete a charge into my swordsman flank. That's no good. The Sea Guard advance towards my lines. Fireball is cast. Fireball is dispelled. The Bolt Thrower goes and casually picks off the last Ogre force remaining on the table, the Sabertusk. The Sea Guard don't cause any damage, and the Ghosts don't have anyone to attack. Over to hand-to-hand combat, my Warrior Priest takes a wound, causes no damage in the challenge. The Swordmasters go and do Swordmaster things, and I completely bomb my 5-up ward saves. I think I pass like 1. That means I lose 11 swordsmen, I kill off 1 Swordmaster in return. If I had passed 2 more ward saves, I would have been steadfast. And if I had held, there would have been a chance that my free company and my knights could have come to my rescue. But, as it was, I would only hold on a double 1s, which I don't get. The swordsmen break and run away from the swordmasters, they're run down, and the knights go off the table. Well, the game is essentially over, but we're gonna finish it out, see what can happen. I charge my free company into the flank of the swordmasters, and the knights move up to engage the Chaos Knights when they return to the board. My skirmishing archers advance and try and pick off the last wound of the Bolt Thrower, which they fail to do. In the hand-to-hand combat phase, I lose 2 free company, but I only kill off 1 Swordmaster. It's probably about what you would expect, but I needed a better result. I lose by a musician, and I hold, but the Swordmasters reform to face me. In my opponent's turn, the Sea Guard go for a long charge into my knights and manage to make it. That's obviously not great for me, but it's not like I'm facing a lot of awesome options. The Chaos Knights return to the table, finding a pretty crowded combat right in front of them. The Bolt Thrower kills off 2 of my archers, although they do pass their panic test. Over to hand-to-hand combat, the High Elf Mage has Devastating Charge, giving her an extra attack, and Heroic Killing Blow. Let's see if she can pick off one of my knights with those advancements. She cannot. In fact, no one causes any damage. My knights can't bring down any elves. The elves can't bring down any knights. That means that I have lost the combat by 2. They've got a flank, a charge, and a rank. I have a standard. That's a 6 or less break test for me, and because it wouldn't be an Empire game without my knights embarrassing themselves, they go and fail it, meaning they run off, they lose their standard, although they do outpace the rest of the elves. And to finish things up, my free company are slaughtered by the Swordmasters. Well, it could have been worse, I guess. We drag down 1 Swordmaster with our numbers. We lose 5 farmers. Naturally, that's not great, and we break from combat, but we escape. And I think with that, we can safely call the end of the game. Big loss for the Ogres and the Empire. Victory to new best friends, Warriors of Chaos and High Elves. So here's the deal. The game was crazy. There were some awesome rolls throughout the thing, some really miserable sets of dice on both sides, and some really strange twists of fate. It's actually not a bad game, and I hope you guys liked it. The problem is I couldn't really enjoy it. The deal is, in the very beginning, as we're setting up the table, my opponent gets the first drop of terrain, and he places that Haunted Mansion right in the center. So I look at him, because I know he's got a Warriors of Chaos army, and I would say, that's really going to cause some problems for both of us. And he kind of looks up like I'm crazy, and then it dawns on me. Oh, Your general is a Chaos Sorcerer, and then everything else falls in line. I know what magic he has. I know he got metal magic. I know where the rest of the terrain pieces are going to go. He's going to line them up in the center of the board. He's going to make funnels for my troops. He's going to stay behind all those things. He's going to force me to move through them, take hits from the ghosts, fire from his archers and his magic, and then when I get close enough, he's going to charge in with his fast, hard-hitting stuff. Knights, chariot, swordmasters. In fact, I could really tell he wanted to line all the terrain in the center of the table. He really wanted to put that forest in that big open area that my empire were able to advance through, which of course would have been awesome to deal with that. So I pretty much saw the entire flow of the battle in that moment, and I wasn't impressed. Granted, it was a really close game. There were a lot of what you'd call net balls, like in tennis when the ball hits the net and you don't know whether it's going to fall on one side or the other. That charge on the right with the Mournfang, they only won by 1 point. If I had held, or if we had tied or won or whatever, I probably would have ground my way through the opposing forces, and it would have been awesome. But instead, the whole flank collapsed and I ran off. So it didn't get there in the way that I thought it would, but the same result is what occurred. I thought that those guys would get chaffed up, we'd get countercharged, we'd get run off one at a time. And in the end, that's what occurred, though it took some weird dice to get there. But I had a really defeatist down attitude about the whole thing. Generally in Warhammer Fantasy, you can take a heavy magic, heavy shooting army, but you probably shouldn't at low points values. The thing with low points values is unless you house rule how magic works, you're still dealing with 2d6 power dice a turn, and the spells are just as powerful as at high levels. My opponent doubled up on mages. Now granted he had to split his power dice, but he's still heavily investing in ranged attacks. Meanwhile, I declined to take a cannon because I didn't want that kind of game. I mean, what if we had both taken armies like that? We would have sat on the opposite sides of the board and just shot at each other and saw whose dice were going to be better. And of course, sticking a haunted mansion in the center of the table to compound that effect, tactically smart, didn't put me in a great mood. And I can't entirely blame my opponent. It's not an unreasonable force. I could easily go and tone up my army to face it. I just kind of like taking infantry blocks and less optimized builds in these smaller games. I think there's much more room for those troops to shine than in a larger game. And really, my opponent chose what he had painted. Granted, he chooses what he paints, and I know he has stuff like a unit of marauders with great weapons and things like that, so I know he's passing up that stuff. But it's not exactly filth. What it is, though, is exactly like the last Warhammer Fantasy Battle army that we played. I played 750 points of orcs and goblins with some big infantry units, some boar boys, a fighty big boss, against high elves, which had a bunch of fast, hard-hitting units, and lots of magic and shooting. And it played exactly the same way. 4-foot table, there's a bunch of terrain in the center, splitting my forces along 2 paths. He set up ambushing forces to attack anyone moving through there that got through the magic and the shooting. You can go and watch that battle report on the channel. Long story short, it went more or less exactly as this one did. I really wish I wasn't sour about this, because it would have been a great game if I had been able to get over my own thinking. It was really close. A little luck on my side and it would have looked completely different, and all this whining that I'm doing now would have seemed ridiculous. But given the setup, I think that's what I needed. I needed luck. I needed things to break my way much more substantially than they needed to break for my opponent. So what's the takeaway? Well, primarily, I just have to sort this out in my own head. I need to either let it go and have a good time using the armies that I want to field, or I need to tone up my armies a little bit more and take a harder list, at least against this particular opponent. I think he probably would appreciate that. But for those of you who are considering small points value games for Warhammer Fantasy, and I do recommend them, I do really like them, think hard about how much magic and shooting you're putting in your list, and what kind of game that's going to create. Notice in this game, my opponent on several occasions went for a big fireball. 3d6 strength 4 hits onto an important unit. He got a little unlucky and he never managed to cast that spell, but if he did, he would have probably just won the game. And it would have been over, I don't know, round 2 or round 3. Think about whether that's really the game you want to play. Anyway, sorry about all that. That's why I put all that at the end instead of the beginning. Hopefully you enjoyed the battle report because it was a good game and the armies looked really nice on the table. Thank you for watching. If you have any observations on this, questions, concerns, criticisms, put them in the comment section below, and hopefully I'll see you on the next one.